It was 1933 and I was 3 years old when we first moved to Wythenshawe from a terraced house, an old terraced house in Longsight. I always remember when we arrived there, the trees and the gardens. We had a garden front and back.
See, some of the property around there hadn't been built, had it? And they were still farm fields, and
That's
the farmers
right.
still used to come and cut the grass and for the hay.
Also, the roads weren't made, so there
No, the roads weren't made at all.
No.
In fact, some of them were only small tracks and lanes.
That's right.
That went round eventually to the Ringway Airport.
That's right, yeah. And the space and the amount of playground that you had as children was just unbelievable. Next door there was a field, and every year they used to cut the grass, the hay that had grown tall, with a scythe and erect this stage, and they'd have a crowning of the Rose Queen. This was the Congregational Church, and everybody came in the Sunday best, and we got to know lots of people.
Yes, it was one of those times from when you tell me, because I wasn't there then, because our association started much later, but I remember you telling me all about these wonderful times that you had as a kid, because it was unknown where you'd come from. There weren't fields, there were nothing really. It was a wonderful time to grow up.
Also, there was so much celebrating. They had the Whitweek processions. They were very well known. The Church of England had theirs and the Catholic Church had theirs, and they were all round the Whitsun. And all the children, the little girls wore long white dresses and the boys had brand new suits, and the brass bands played. In fact, everything was perfect, and that's how it seemed to be until...
Did it go on forever?
1939, on a Sunday September morning, everything changed. That's the day the war broke out, World War II.
Yeah.
Where were you when...
Well,
we never quite fathomed it, did we?
Well, me, see, I'm a bit older than you. Consequently, I was more or less involved more in the actual war period. But I was only 11 years of age when war broke out. And I always remember that a lot of the male teachers were called up for the forces, and there was only one, in fact, remained, which, due to the fact that he wasn't 100% fit, at least that's what they said. So he remained, and he was a science teacher. But the remainder of the people, or teachers there, were all female. There were no male teachers left. And when I left school at the age of 14, I went straight into a factory. So that was my early days. I don't remember a lot other than the fact that there was on one occasion when I was later on, when I was at the factory, I went to night school, and the sirens on the way back, because we had no buses in those days at that time anyway, we had to walk, and I remember the sirens going off, and within a very short time the battery, the gun battery that was stationed or positioned in off-end fields, used to take off. They were manned by women, funnily enough, not men. And the shrapnel that came off it used to be pelting down like rain. And when I was walking along near Ardcastle Avenue, just short of 200 Darley Avenue, they were hitting the pavement. And when I think about it afterwards, how lucky I was not to be hit by the shrapnel. It was just like rain. And that is something which I should imagine a lot of people at that time, if they were out during air raids, had to experience. And it was a dangerous time. But you carry on.
Yes, I know. The thing that stuck in my mind very clearly was when we had to go and be fitted for gas masks. There was my little brother and myself and parents walked down the road, and it was dark, and of course the street lights were out, and people had blackout blinds at the windows, and we went to Sharston Hall with all the other families. We queued up and we went into the old hall, which was really a shame as years had gone by to be neglected, and instead of being a beautiful hall, it was, the plaster was dirty and everything was grimy in this huge great room. We went to a counter shepherding, and they opened these boxes, and all the children had to try these.
Well, try them on. And
Gas masks were absolutely awful. They had straps that fitted over and a nozzle at the
it's
front.
a frightening experience, really.
Yes.
For kids, because they put them on and they tried to drag them off.
Well,
because
children were crying and screaming.
Yeah.
And then when you finally got the right fitting, they packed it into a little brown box with a string.
A piece of string,
yes, which you put over your shoulder, and went out into the dark night thinking, what have we got to wear these for? What'll happen? What's gas? And the poor parents just didn't know how to explain things to children, and they just sort of said, oh, it'll be all right, you'll never have to use these. Unfortunately, we didn't have to use them.
But it was strange, really, because everywhere you went, everybody had this cardboard box with a piece of string round the neck, and everybody had to carry them.
Then it became a fashion item because you could take it out of the cardboard box and put it in like a hold-all that was a strap. And you're right. But as the war went on, people didn't want to bother. They didn't take them. Nobody took the gas masks with them anywhere after the first 2 years.
It became a nuisance, really.
Yeah. Then we had to have clothing coupons, so you couldn't have any clothes. It wasn't just a matter of poor families saving up for clothes. You couldn't have them anyway. And then you had your ration book. And our job as young children was to go every Friday to the shops with the ration book to get the rations. You used to get so much butter, so much sugar, a little piece of meat. And
I remember sitting down to a meal at my parents' home, and my father saying, where did you manage to get all this meat from? And it turned out we were eating horse meat, and he wasn't very happy about it at all. In fact, he pushed his plate away. He said, I can't eat that.
Yeah, things were different. And then, of course, there was the Anderson shelters.
I was going to say about the Anderson shelters. I remember the vehicle coming along with all these piled up on the back and two blokes yanking these things off, and they were quite heavy. And, of course, you were supposed to erect them on the ground, just on the ground, but my parents, I think your parents the same, dug them into the ground.
That's right.
And they were blowing cold when to go in those. And eventually, of course, you never used them.
Yeah. We used to sit in there. Well, my father had got a job by then at Barton Power Station, and the only way he could get to work was on a bike. And along with a lot of other men, they used to ride the bike 10 miles, work 12-hour shifts, and then all the way back to where they lived. And we always had an air raid while my father was on nights. And my poor mother, by then, had to deal with two children that were quite startled with the sound of the sirens. And my brother never woke up, I don't think. We used to prop him, get him down the stairs by me pulling his feet down the step one at a time with the mother holding him up from the back, drag him round the corner to the air raid shelter and lower him in.
Yeah.
And we used to sit there and hear the planes droning because we were quite near to Manchester Airport, which was then known as Ringway Airport.
But,
and of course, you had the ACAC, as you were saying, you had the searchlights. It was quite frightening, really. And
the barrage balloons were stuck
the
round
barrage balloons. They were like huge grey elephants that were tethered to the ground, floating above you. It was supposedly to stop...
low-flying aircraft.
Machine gun, yes, of course. And...
but getting away from that, do you remember your father, and my father for that matter, having to dig for victory?
Oh, yes.
Well, we had to grow as much as we possibly could for our own use, not for sale, but for our own use. And we had chickens. I remember we used to have chickens, and we used to buy them as pullets. And when they got to 2 years old, of course, we used to kill them, and it was my job to kill these damn things and pluck them.
Yeah.
But at least we never went short of something to eat.
My father, as well, managed to get enough money to build a greenhouse, which was absolutely amazing because we had tomatoes, but we had lots and lots of tomatoes. And we used to give them to the neighbours, and at least those with some of the lettuce and stuff that you grew in the garden.
Yeah.
Made a good meal. One that wonders, I often wonder anyway, about how the mums managed to present a decent meal out of the size of the rations and the quality of the stuff you got.
Well, the length of time that they were away shopping was amazing, because they had everything had to be queued up for, and always long queues waiting for basic things really as well. It was very difficult. From a woman's point of view, a housewife then in those days was very, very difficult, and I don't know how they managed, but they did. It's amazing.
That's true, they did. The next thing that comes to mind as well is we grew so many tomatoes that we were able to sell them and buy a pair of scales somehow, or borrow a pair of scales from somebody and weigh the tomatoes, and for a few pennies, which went into a jam jar that paid for the next year's plants or something like that, or something in the garden. Everybody became quite ingenious at the ideas that they came up with. We were taught to make clothes out of old clothes, and if you had a sewing machine, then you were in demand. My mother went on war work. She worked at first machine gunning at the pockets for the machine gun bullets to go in the webbing.
Yeah.
And that was a company down at Sharston. It had been Thomas French that used to make curtain braids, curtain webbing. And then after a while she transferred to a place that was known as the Washway, which was sewing parachutes, and she became a parachute packer. And from there she used to bring home bits of silk which we made bits of underwear with. And then she also, as time went on, got a job at the Tatton Cinema in Gatley. Well, this was our lifesaver, the Tatton Cinema in Gatley. We used to see the Pathy News with all that was going on. It was very hard then because you only had the radio, there was no television, we didn't have telephones, and certainly not all the mobile phones and things that are available now. So Pathy News was something that you sort of were able to see the soldiers fighting, in battles and things, and it made it all seem, really quite horrible.
In some respects, when you were younger, it was like exciting. It was only when you get older that you realise war was a terrible thing. But as a kid, it was all exciting, all these sort of things. I used to assist them when I got older, before I got called up. I used to go to the Home Guard, and they used to use me to throw hand grenades, so they could, because I was young and they were much older, being in the, and I used to throw these hand grenades, show them how it was done, and it was, when I think back on it, it was a bit of a strange setup in a way, because my father, unfortunately for us, worked away, and he did a lot of work down in London, so my mother had to provide for everything. So we didn't have a father during the war for very long. He was nearly always away working.
Well, yes, the same
so anyway,
with my
there
father. Yeah, I remember after a while, a piano suddenly appeared in the house. How he managed to save up and how that piano was delivered, I just can't remember. But my father, who'd been in the band with the Manchester Regiment as a younger man, I suppose yearned that his family would take, into become musicians like he'd been, which was a far cry from what he was doing now, working at the power station. And we were given a chance to go for piano lessons. And my brother and I used to laugh about it as we got older, because he was absolutely useless and dreaded going for piano lessons because he never improved. And my poor father was paying for piano lessons forevermore, I think. Also in those days, of course, we had the doctor's man who used to come round and collect.
Oh yes, national health in those days.
Yeah. He used to collect a shilling a week. Every Monday night about 6 o'clock there'd be a knock on the door, and it was a doctor's man for his money, so it meant that if you caught the measles or whatever childhood thing you did manage to pick up, chicken pox, used to put you in the same bed so that you'd all get it at the same time, because it cost such a lot of money to get the doctor's man. And then you think of the wonderful national health that happened after the war. And then again during the war, you got used to seeing sticky tape over all the windows, didn't you?
That's right. All the windows had to have sticky tape on because stop them from blowing in, so it helped to stop them from blowing inside.
Well, when I was about 11, we sat our exams, like they called it 11 plus now, but it was called scholarship then. And by some surprise to the family, I passed my 11 plus and went to school at Whitworth Street, Manchester Central High School in the centre of Manchester on Whitworth Street. Had a uniform, which you got then. Didn't have to have coupons for the uniform. And every morning about 8:20, I used to get the 46 bus into Manchester, and every evening about 3:45, I'd be on the bus back. And during the period of the Blitz, the Manchester Blitz, you could see what a difference it was making to the centre of Manchester, where they had bombs, where, you know, big craters where you used to be a big shop called Paulding's on Stretford Road. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
It's now like a Debenhams type of shop.
The only traffic we had then was a tram.
That's right.
The trams used to go from Princess Parkway to Barlamore Road into Manchester. I remember after one of the blitzes, because I was everybody was still going to work as best they could. We were getting a tram to Old Trafford, and just near where it was called the Palace, where they used to go dancing at the Palace, and the cinema on the other side was called the Ritz, where flames were shooting up, must be 50 foot in the air, because the mains had been damaged and they caught fire. It was
that wasn't very far from Whitworth Street School.
And the trams couldn't get past because of the flames.
Yeah.
So it's quite a frightening time, and yet somehow it was a bit exciting, really. It's strange to say that.
During the time I was going to Whitworth Street School, the same thing happened. Every few days you got to school, there were less and less pupils there because they'd been moved. They'd been, perhaps the houses had been bombed, or they'd been, you know, evacuated into the country so that they'd be safer. And the same thing again. The teachers went, you know, less and less, until in the end, by the time it got to just before the end of the war, I left. I left without permission and got a job and worked for a week and got sent back to school because I wasn't allowed to leave.
But it's funny, you see, you were the clever one. I wasn't very clever, you see.
I mean, you were bright in a different way.
My parents didn't have any money
Yes.
to send us have a holiday, and they had this scheme going for people whose families couldn't afford a holiday to send them to a Birkdale camp, which was in the area of Southport. Birkdale's camp. It was like well, we used to refer to it as a concentration camp because it was so it was so basic that I was glad to get back. When I did get back,
you told me that you cried.
Yeah, well, I tried to get away, but they wouldn't let me get away. And I remember when I got back, I'd started with scarlet fever.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, I remember all those sorts of things. Yeah. We mentioned about the picture, about the Tatton in Gatley and other cinemas, and that was an era of film stars, and it was a distraction from the war because the American films were like, the Hollywood was like heaven, you know, beautiful houses, beautiful people, stories, and we used to sometimes go on a Saturday morning to the Cowboy. Well, at first it wasn't my thing at all, but because I had a younger brother, I had to take him. And then we used to walk all the way from where we lived on Brownlee Road to the Tatton in Gatley. And I think it cost twopence. And watch the film and then play part coming back.
Bumping your backside.
Pretending you were on a horse and
Yeah.
things like kids do really, don't they?
Yeah.
But the cinema became really, really very important. It was an escape, wasn't it, really?
Yeah, yeah.
And the women all looked so beautiful, the clothes were lovely, the men were handsome, and and if you didn't like the ending, you made your own up, didn't you? I'm sure that you used to like to go to the cinema, didn't you?
Well, I did, yes. It's the only really, anything that was really going in those days, because you didn't go to pubs, you didn't go drinking or anything like that. There were no clubs. There were dance halls, but I'm afraid you were more into dancing than I was. I didn't used to bother with dancing. But it's something you managed to make your own entertainment. That was the only way, really. And cinema was something which you not only enjoyed going to see, but then you used to have favourites. Like if it was like
Errol Flynn.
Errol
You
Flynn.
always wanted
So
to be like...
you want to grow a moustache to look like Errol Flynn.
Yeah.
And Clark Gable as well. When I used to get away with that because I had big ears like he did, you see.
And they used to have the Pally on a Saturday night. And then something else that had happened as well, and it gradually happened, all the foreign soldiers used to come. We had soldiers from Poland, from Czechoslovakia, all these languages. This was before the Americans arrived, I'm talking
But that
about.
was the airport that brought them there,
Well,
wasn't it, of
the
course?
6th Paratroop, the Airborne Division, trained at Manchester Airport, and it was very Ringway Airport as it was. And of course, you got to know them. I mean, I was really too young to have them as boyfriends, but my other girlfriends had older sisters, and they used to do 6 parachute jumps from 5 from a plane and 1 from a
balloon in Tatton Park.
Yeah, over Tatton Park, that's right. And after those, they would get the wings that could stitch over the pocket of the uniform, and a little brooch which they could give their girlfriends or their mums or whatever. And of course, we were very proud of them, and they used to sing a song about when the red light goes on, we are ready for the sergeant to shout number 1.
Yeah. that was
Your
it.
knees and your feet close together, you'd jump out of the plane. And they used to sing these songs. And of course, my father, being an ex-army man, had his eye on all these young men in uniforms, and this 15, 16-year-old girl, 14, 15-year-old girl. And you grew up quite quickly at that time, I think, because lots of girls that I went to school with had started to go to work. My best friend, one worked at Lewis's, which is now Primark in Manchester, and another one worked for a fashion company called C&A, which used to be on Oldham Street, Manchester.
And Affleck's.
And Affleck's, yes.
Affleck's, which is now...
Affleck's was a bit more fuddy-duddy.
Yeah.
And when I decided that this may be the life for me, that I wasn't getting anywhere at school, really, apart from singing Jerusalem and, sort of at assembly. Everything had just gone. It's one of the things I've always regretted, isn't it?
Well,
Because I realised I could have got so much further in life, but in the end, would I have been any happier anyway?
no, you met me and that dragged you back then.
That was a long time later. But, no, so I decided to leave, as I say, and had to go back. But finally, there wasn't any restrictions on anything anymore. There were too many other things that people were worrying about. And I think we were getting more news about the invasion, that France had fallen and one thing. Nobody really knew. So they wanted to go out and have a good time when they had the chance. So I decided to leave, which I did. And my father was very disappointed, but that was it. Anyway, my mother said, well, do something, something that you feel as though you've achieved something. And she said, why don't you apply for this job? This is a job at a hairdresser's. something I'd never even thought of. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I did. And I got a job in Didsbury Village for 2 gentlemen. And they had a salon in Manchester, and they were very, very well respected in Didsbury Village. And I went to work there, and they were absolutely wonderful. I was apprenticed there. The 2 girls I worked with that were senior to me, both had husbands serving in the forces, and they used to long for letters. If they got a letter, they read them over and over again and talked about them constantly. And it was really, it gave me an opportunity. I earned some money. And even though you couldn't buy many clothes, you could save up and buy something. And it was from there, one day I got on the bus. And the bus, we'd finished work a bit early, and somebody said, I think it's time we had a little early, a break. You can go home. So got on the bus in Didsbury Village, and it pulled up at the traffic lights, ready to turn left and go down Ballamore Road, when somebody jumped on the bus and shouted, the war's over. Well, nobody would believe it. They thought he was making a joke. Yeah. But finally, the coin dropped. And we got home, and I ran in the house, and there was going to be such a lot of bonfire across the road on the corner, which had been a sand pit, and everybody was cheering, and it was just...
Yeah, I don't remember any of that, unfortunately. The only bits I remember was when I left school and went into a factory.
Yeah, but you used to say to me that the men used to sit around and talk about...
Yeah, well, when we were in the factory, yes. Well, I was only young, and of course most of the young 19-year-olds and 20-year-olds were called up, so all you were left with were the rather elderly people, or people that weren't 100% fit.
Well, they probably seemed elderly to you then.
And at lunchtime we used to sit around this fire type place where I used to do what they call soldering, and they used to talk about as the papers came through every day, and it was like the armchair strategists, weren't they? Everybody knew how to win the war. When they were invading Russia, what we'd do is this. And I grew up amongst a lot of much older people, and in a way, I've always been in the presence of people that were older than myself. Not anymore now, of course, because I'm 92. So it was an unusual time for me growing up. I don't know, it's hard to explain really, because even though I lived through it, I don't remember a lot of it, only factory work.
Well, I remember when it got towards the end of the war, and you were talking earlier on about having crushes, there used to be crooners then, and all of a sudden who came along? But Frank Sinatra.
Frank Sinatra, don't forget Bob, don't forget the other fella as well.
And then also there was the big bands, these wonderful big bands. And who was it? Glenn Miller.
Glenn Miller,
this particular sound of Glenn Miller.
And Crosby, the
String
singer.
of Pearls. Yeah, well, Bing Crosby was old-fashioned to us then.
Well, to you, it wasn't, but to me...
Frank Sinatra's songs were better. Yeah. And of course he used to sing and Owen Vera Lynn. Now, in a way, you remember her voice because it was always there when you were a kid, singing the songs like, We'll Meet Again and all the rest of it, that very sad songs. And another thing that springs to mind as well, more on the serious side, was one day, just before I left school, I remember I used to walk through along the canal and into Piccadilly to get the bus back home. And there's a little newspaper kiosk on the corner. And if I could, I managed to buy a newspaper, each day. And I kept the newspapers for a long time. Sadly, lost them about the second we moved, when we moved from Donisher Road. But this particular day, they looked at the paper, opened it, and I couldn't believe it. It was Belson. And it was like, now we were thinking about all the happy times that we might have as things were getting brighter. all these records of the concentration camps and the terrible way that the Jewish people had been treated. It was there, and then it was there on Patty News, and I can remember them seeing them, you know, like skeletons with these striped, like pyjama things on, and they'd be, I think it was the British that had got to Belsen, wasn't it?
Well, I don't know if it was the British,
So,
but the Russians were the first ones to experience this, and of course because
and
they
it
were...
was just so horrifying.
Anyway,
Yeah, to see it.
but there was one thing that you never mentioned about, during the war, that you used to have picture post.
Oh yes.
That is something from it was the only paper that was like
It was a weekly magazine.
Yeah. It had all the things about the going on in America, really, the fashion in America, the film stars that came from America. Well, that was still
no,
Picture
that wasn't
Post.
the Picture Post. Was a magazine about the wartime, about like a paper with more photographs in.
Oh, was it about the war? I thought it was about...
No, the other one was Picture Goer.
Picture
The
Goer.
one you're
I'm getting
talking
confused
about
there
was
slightly.
Picture Goer, yeah. And yes, that one was about this, the films and film stars, and they always had a portrait on one page that you could cut out and save, put in a photograph frame.
Yeah,
The
that's
girls
right.
used to have a crush on, you know, like you were saying, on Clark Gable and different
Gable,
ones.
yes, definitely.
Yeah, and Tyrone Powers and some of the names just.
And what was the other bloke that used to sing When I'm Calling You?
Oh, those were very old-fashioned, weren't they? Jeanette MacDonald and Nelson Eddy.
Yeah, MacDonald.
Oh,
Used to try and sing like him.
And there was Shirley Temple. This was a long time before, when the war had just started. And she was a little American girl that tap danced. She was about 5 or 6.
Yeah, and
She
also
had all curls and
there was the other one that was a skater,
Oh, Sonia Heaney.
Sonia Heaney. Yeah.
Gosh, where did I get that name from? Yes, there was many things like that.
But
And then, of
these
course,
were
after the
idols.
war...
Well, you've got idols now in football. We had idols in the cinema. It was the only way we could really express ourselves properly.
Well, when
or
the Americans finally arrived, as we were saying, it was well known that in the centre of Manchester, if you went in the Gaumont Long Bar,
Oh, yeah.
it was a place where everybody, well, what they used to call picking up place. It was a place where the girls could meet the Yanks.
Yeah.
And of
right.
course, also on a Saturday, I think, my friend's older sister used to go to a club in Warrington, and I think there must have been a big American base somewhere near Warrington.
Well, there was, yes, was, and also an air base as well.
Yeah. And
That's where
they
my
used to get
brother
the
went.
train from, I think it was Gatley. They used to get this train and go to the dance, you know. And of course, there was a lot of romances that went wrong, as they always do. And then there were GI brides, weren't there? That thought to go to America was going to be like Hollywood on the pictures.
Yeah, until they got there.
Yeah, a lot of them, yes, changed their minds, yeah.
No, it's a very interesting
Well,
time. But
after the war then, you realise how all the boys that you should have been having dates with weren't there because they'd been called up when they were 18. And if you were about 14 or 15 and you were just starting to sort of find yourself going to the pictures with a boy, there would be no boys to go to the pictures with. But once they started coming home, they'd have a demob leave, which meant they had, was it about 6 weeks, something like that, to readjust.
Like that, yeah.
Better than the First World War, though, they just came out in huge numbers, which created such a problem. They were given a suit. You could choose between this pinstripe thing and a herringbone thing or something. Neither of them were very nice, but at least it was a suit, civilian suit.
You know, to get brown boots.
And
brown
then,
boots.
of course, I had, because of where we lived and because of my age, I got to know a family of boys going to St Luke's Church. And they used to have a Toc H thing there and scouts and in the hall and dances on a Saturday. And I got to know them. And I always felt very sorry for the mother. I used to say to you, didn't I? Her husband was in the Navy. so he was away. 2 other sons were in the Navy, they were away. 1 son was in the Army, he was away. And her youngest son, the youngest of 4, was in Bagley Sanatorium. And of course, in those days, if you went to Bagley Sanatorium, you were very, very fortunate if you survived. And unfortunately, Raymond didn't survive. But I had a boyfriend, the 3 sons, because as I got a little bit older and able to go out, dates in them days were going to the pictures or going to a dance. And that's where it finished, not like today.
Yeah, but I was a bit backward in coming forward,
You
because
didn't have a lot.
all these lads that were in the forces, and I was only like 15, 16, these women, sometimes married, were trying to take you home. And it was so embarrassing. I mean, and I didn't, I mean, people are more advanced these days, but when I was, 15 or 16, I didn't know what kissing was properly.
I knew that was what it was like, wasn't it? It changed a lot.
Everything changed so much.
Exactly. Well, then, of course, these boys or young men that came back, some had seen service and been in war service. I mean, Tony Hamlet, my first serious boyfriend, was quite a bit older than me, and he'd been in the Navy. In fact, he was about 9 years older than me. But I think also they wanted to come home and get married. They didn't want to come home, and they just wanted a home, didn't they?
Yeah.
So it wasn't long before a lot of friends of mine were getting married when they were just 18 and 19. And no houses to live in. You just had to find a rented flat or live with your parents, and no chance really, was
That's
there?
right.
Because there hadn't been any building.
I mean, I'd lived with my parents until I was near enough 27 years of age. From the age of 3, I'd lived at 200 Darley Avenue.
Yeah.
And it's all I'd know. That's all I'd known.
That was the natural though, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was normal, yeah.
They stayed until they got married. Well, then I got engaged, I think. I met Dennis, my first husband, who had been in the paratroop regiment, came home in very sad circumstances because his older brother had been killed in Monte Cassino. And of course, this photograph of the older brother who had been killed sat on the sideboard. Everybody had a sideboard in those days when they could afford it, and dominated the whole room and dominated the whole family, the loss. I think he was about 24, and he'd left a wife, and she was expecting a baby, and that boy grew up never having seen his father like many.
But that was the norm. That was the norm.
But
Very
it
sad time
affected
in
the
that
family
respect.
and affected our marriage in a way, because it was sort of like always this sadness through the whole family. And then came an opportunity. The first houses that were built on licence in Manchester were on Dunisher Road, which is New Hall Green. And for, I think they won that £1,500 to buy a house. But you could get a 99-year
lease.
No, yeah, you've done 99-year lease, but you get a 95%.
Oh, get 95% mortgage, yes.
But you had to go and see the builder first to see if he would accept you. And I remember going to the builder and asking a preliminary question, and then going with my husband to be interviewed to see and we had no money. But they wouldn't be built for so long. So we found every means you could of saving up.
Saving up, the deposit.
And scraping together this deposit to buy a house. No furniture, no carpets, no curtains, nothing.
Which in those
house.
days was unknown for our parents, because they'd never had enough money to buy a house.
Well, they never had the opportunity
to
to
buy a house was not possible.
Yeah. Well, all the people on that road, there was only about 10 houses originally.
Yeah.
And they all gradually had a family, got their homes together, And those were the first, as I say, the first houses. And we've been back there since, not to go in a house, but just to look, you know, and say. And they still look nice. They've been extended. They still look as nice now as they did. And those were the first private houses that Manchester Corporation allowed to be built on council, you know, on council land. So that was a good chance to have a house. And lived there for about 15, 16 years. And that's another story after that.
I think we've exhausted it, haven't we?
You've done very well.
Oh, you have, Audrey. You've done very well.
Oh, I don't know. You did
No,
very well
I'm just
because
a
I
chipper,
know.
I'm just a chipper-inner.
I can
Oh, I
remember.
think you've done more than that, Alec.
Do you think?
No,
Oh, yes.
I think so. I didn't
Yes,
over.
indeed. Just to go back to your family,
Yeah.
I mean, in your childhood, your father was in the First World War, wasn't he?
Correct. He joined, I didn't know until recently that he joined the army. Of course, in those days, it was all volunteers, the First World War. And he went in at the age of 17, which is really, he shouldn't have done, but he falsified something to enable him to get into the forces and served for 4 years in various places. And surprise, surprise, I found out that he'd not only served in Egypt, but also at the Dardanelles or Gallipoli. He'd spent some time also in Khartoum, and for the last 12 months he was transferred to France, and of course he was involved in various operations there. And surprise, surprise, he came out alive with having been had two occasions where he'd been shot, and was eventually invalided out, and was able to wear, from all accounts, a red flash on his uniform to prove that he'd been severely wounded. And he spent some time also in hospital. I believe he spent about
Nell Lane, wasn't it?
Nell Lane eventually, or Withington Hospital as it's called now, or was. It's not a hospital anymore. But prior to that, he also spent time in 2 other hospitals, which were probably down south when he was first invalided out. But no, he had rather a charmed life. And the funny thing is, parents never used to talk about these things. And it's only now, years afterwards, after my father died when he was 65, which wasn't a great age, and you find out afterwards what these guys did and where they went, and it's quite remarkable that they survived, some of them. I can never understand how he managed to get through it all. But anyway, he did.
When you were
he was
talking
even,
about,
he was
yeah.
even in the Camel Corps in Egypt, and he did some wonderful things.
It's been a revelation, really, in a way, hasn't it?
And the funny thing was that when I eventually got called up, because I was in a reserved occupation, it was supplying the coal mining industry with equipment. So it was important that carried on. It was a necessity, really. And when I eventually got called up, and I look back on photographs, I find that my father had a photograph taken in 1914 on a ship going out to Egypt, and I look at my history, and I was photographed in a similar way going out again to Egypt on a boat, on a ship. And when I wrote back saying that I'd been climbing up the pyramids, he wrote back and said it's exactly what I did when I was out there. And then when he went to Khartoum, I was asked to volunteer for Khartoum, which I turned down because I was too comfortable where I was. So it seems as though history seems to repeat itself a lot.
Yes, yes.
Amazing.
What about you, Audrey? What about your parents?
Well, my father, both my parents had a very, very sad beginning in life. My father was found wandering in the centre of Manchester, and I've got what's the name to say, he was admitted to what was called the Ragged School. He was arrested, well, taken into care, and taken to the Ragged School, which is at Ardwick Green. And there he stayed until he was about 16. And on the report from the Ragged School, He said, mother dead, father bad. Simple as that. Describing him, his build and his colouring. And he was one of 5 children, but the eldest boy had left and found work when the mother died. The daughter had married and taken one of the others in to live with her, and it was my father and his younger brother. They were only quite young as him. I think my father was about 8 or 9 when he was found. And he stayed there until he was 16. And then I always understood him saying there'd been 2 men had come round and they were talking about them, asking those that were about to leave the orphanage about a career in the army. And my father went into the army in the boys, and he trained as a bandsman. I mean, he must have had that leaning towards music. And all his life, I can remember, he followed opera, he followed, the band music. He just loved music, and he stayed and served with the band of the Manchester Regiment on tour, and he served in Northern Ireland, and that was his experience of problems. That was in the time of the Black and Tans. It was in the 20s. Then he joined a band of some, I think it was one of the, like Fodens, the big engineering. They had this brass band things, particularly in the north, isn't it? It's very popular, Yorkshire and Lancashire and so on. And they played at a bandstand in what's the park near Dickinson Road? Blackfields. They had the bandstands.
Yes.
And it was a thing on a Sunday afternoon that all the girls would walk round, and that's where my mother met my father. Now, my mother had a terribly sad life. She was the youngest of 5 in quite a comfortable family, and her father was an electrician working on the big houses, turning the gas lighting into the electricity, and worked with a small team, but as an individual, so some were electricians and some did various other things. And it was bringing up the very old premises, Victorian properties, a little bit up to date, modernising them. So he travelled all over. Well, he left his wife with 5 children. There must have been the thing, 5 children. And my mother was the youngest. And, of course, and then her mother was just left with, I think, 2 of the youngest ones until the bailiffs came. He disappeared. And they were just taken in. My mother was taken into St Thomas's workhouse with her mother when she was 5. And her mother died in there at 40, I think she was 42 when she died of TB, which was a common thing really in those days, and probably neglect catching it, and not having a decent stamina really, I suppose. And she was taken by an uncle down to London, to Wembley, and there she lived a very nice period of time until she was 12. They had a milliner's shop in Wembley, and it was there she got her idea. She was always very ladylike, always very smart, very attractive when she was younger. And when she was about 12 or 13, she came back, but when she came back here, she had to go part-time to work in the mills and part-time to school. And she was quite clever, actually, wasn't she?
Oh, yes, bright woman.
Very, very bright. She could tell you all about history.
All your family are bright.
Oh,
Yes, they are.
say
They're
that.
quite bright.
But anyway, she would have loved to have been a teacher. And anyway, she met my father, and they both had this thing in common. They wanted a home, people who've never had the comfort of a nice home. It's a very sort of special, precious thing. And all my father wanted was a garden as well, a garden. So the fact that he came to Wythenshawe got the opportunity because all he could get when he came out of the army was a little terrace house in Longside. It was mouse infected, it was dirty, and, you know. So when they got this opportunity to go to, come to Wythenshawe and get into that kind of a house, it was always the nicest house on the block, wasn't it? Well, you didn't know then, of
Well,
course.
not there, but
you
it's the
knew-
same with my
You
father.
knew what she was like anyway,
My
didn't you?
my family had to grow up with my grandparents,
Yeah.
and because there were so many living in the house, that's the reason why they were able to get a house in Chorlton.
And we found some things about when they tried to buy furniture and the price, and it was so cheap.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they still have the bills. Some of the bills.
But then
for the
your
furniture.
father's sister married quite well off, and
Yeah.
married
married
a man who used to imported, was it
material cloth,
cotton
cotton cloth.
in
Yeah.
Manchester? Yeah.
So
they
she had
lived
a
in
good
Lim.
she had a good life.
Yeah, she had a very good life, didn't she?
But no
Sadly,
family.
she died, but they had no. Yeah, and your father was the poor brother, wasn't she? Yeah. We don't know a great deal about Alec's mum. We want to try and find out more. With
Well, the only thing I do know is that during the war she was worked in munitions.
most women did, though, didn't they?
And
Yeah.
then she turned supposed to be a cook, which is hard to believe because my mother was the worst cook in the world. So I think she poisoned a few people on the way.
She was, bless her. She
But
was.
she's a very hard worker.
And we bought
good.
a house, I think I mentioned it to you earlier on Cheadle Road, a big old house. I'll show you what it was a before and after picture, and you'd be quite surprised. And we were there for 30 odd years. But during the time we were there, we brought it up to standard, didn't we? And then we decided, because we had a friend who was an architect as well, and we were discussing it with him, it was built in such a way that with a lot of work, it could be made into two houses. It was a very big house. It was a 7-bedroomed house.
Semi-detached house,
Yeah, big Victorian.
but very big.
So we set about turning it to two houses and having it restored, working with the builder, which we finally got the first house nearly done, and we took an overdraft out to pay for it because we were both working. I had my own shop, and you had a good job then, didn't you? So we set off doing this, and then we bought went into a business. We had an antique business in the centre of Manchester in the Royal Exchange before the bomb. And there we were, very happily going along. Halfway through, we got the front house part nearly done. And one day, you were taking me into work that particular day because you wanted to do something. We had a car and a van, but you wanted to do something, so he said, I'll drop you off. It was Saturday morning in the summer of 1998, was it 1998? And as I got into the Royal Exchange, I couldn't get in because the police cordon was round. Well, we were so used to having fire alarms, it wasn't anything unusual. So I thought I knew how to get in the back way, so I nipped down Half Moon Street round the back and got in. And then they said, there's been a bomb scare. So I said to the security man,
And the
Where's
van
the bomb?
was parked.
Where's the bomb?
We could see it.
So-
the van was parked just down the road, opposite
So
where
we
we were.
We went upstairs with the security man, and he said, see the van across there, which was about as far as the houses across the park here. He said, that's been stuck there from early morning, and the police are getting a bit suspicious, and I think somebody said something about a phone call. Well, within no time at all, the alarms went, and we finished up. You'd gone home, I was on my own there. I just started to get everything out of the safe to put into the unit when the alarm went, and we were all told we had to get out. And we were sent into St Anne. Oh, first of all, we went to Cross Street, then they took us into St Anne Square, then they took us against the church, and then we finally finished up outside Kendall's corner door. And outside Kendall's corner door for years there'd been a man with a truck, and it was full of vegetables and fruit.
It's still there.
Is it still there?
Yeah, it's still there.
And I stood there, and all of us, and a friends of mine, a girlfriend who worked at the airport, and her husband was there, and he heard this, alarm, and he'd come into the city because his twin daughters were there to book a holiday or something. Yeah. And as he walked across and joined me, the bomb went off. So we all ducked down, and said to you many times, the strangest thing, glass, when it's shattered like that, it creates a vacuum. And the glass didn't come like that. It went like that. And it
goes
right
the
down
curve
like
out,
that, all over the place. And we were told to run. And I remember quite clearly running down the middle of Deansgate, in the centre with everybody else. And the girl in front of me, she had little pots of blood on her blouse, and I had some hankies, and I padded, it was just tiny little bits of glass that had. She wasn't injured. It was just little pricks of glass, And I ran all the way to Knott Mill. Oh no, I didn't.
No,
sorry.
I picked you up.
Yeah, no, I ran all the way, first of all, to the end of Deansgate. Then I thought, I've got to find some way of phoning. So I made my way into St Peter's Square, and there was a telephone box in St Peter's Square then. It's not there now anymore. And there was a queue. Everybody wanted to phone home because no mobiles then.
Yes, quite.
I ran along Deansgate and finally found the phone box in St Peter's Square, and people were getting change out, and the nervousness and everything else. There was money on the floor that had been rejected, and just the lady before me picked up the phone. She said, I don't know what to do. And the voice came on the phone, the operator, just speak, we'll put you through. It wasn't, you don't need to put any money in, it's on. So I rang you at home and told you briefly what had happened, and you said, I'll see you at Knott Mill. And I walked the rest
as far as you could go. You couldn't go any further into Manchester than Knott Mill.
We went back the next morning, on the Sunday morning, early, and it was really hot and sunny that day. And we went with Vicky, didn't we?
Yeah.
And we were in Zone A, or 1, whichever they called. I think it was Zone A, which was all round St Anne Square, the Royal Exchange, Marks and Spencer's. That whole area that was it. And it took us a month of trying to get in, and we finally did get in. What had happened was, of course, that the water tanks up above the glass dome had burst, and water had all come through. And we got a catalogue, explanation, didn't we, of what happens when that kind of bomb goes off, this sort of vacuum. Anyway, to fast forward a little, we tried everything to find an alternative because it was all our living. Everybody in the Royal Exchange.
Of 3 people that committed suicide as a result of that because we got no help. The only help we got was from the Lord Mayor's appeal.
Which lent you some money to start off again.
But you had to pay it back.
We had meeting after meeting, and I was one asked to go on this committee. We met the Lord Mayor, we met Michael Heseltine, we met...
Well, you did. You met the Prime Minister.
It was, what's his name? But what's he called?
John Major.
John Major, yes, sorry. And what had happened, I got a phone call in the morning, can you get down to Heron House as soon as possible? Which I got the car, started, because I used to drive into Manchester each day and back working in the Royal Exchange. And got so far, got a puncture. Managed to get it sorted and I had a parking place in Manchester because you were on the committee so that you could be at a meeting if it was necessary. and you needed, and you've got to make your way to Heron House as soon as you can. So I ran from the car park, and when the security man met me outside Heron House, we ran up the corridor and through this door, didn't know what was going on, burst through this door, and there was a long table, and sat round it was the Lord Mayor, Michael Heseltine, John Major, and gentlemen being gentlemen, and a lady coming in, they all stood up. So I thought, well, can't be bad. And I sat down next to John Major, and I was never so angry in all my life as I was at Michael Heseltine. We tried everything to explain to him, and he said, well, if you didn't have terrorist insurance, there's nothing we can do, unless you live in Northern Ireland. Now, in Northern Ireland, you got the compensation to start again, or at least some help towards it. So it left a lot of us with no business, no money, no income.
The council were very good. The people had mortgages; they didn't have to pay rent. You didn't have to pay.
Barclays were wonderful.
They were very good.
They said you don't pay anything at all on this loan that you'd had for your building, and that was it, wasn't it? They were very good. And finally, we managed to sell the front house. We managed to get straight. So it made a big difference to Manchester. It's given it a new life, and it's lovely to see it now. But I knew Manchester like the back of my hand because I'd been to school there, and I'd been, working there all those years, and I really love it. And we still go back often now. Yeah.
We still see people
so we're
working now.
We're a Manchester couple, you see.
Oh, very much Mancunians. Yes, very much so. If we were to, we're coming, I think, towards the end of the interview, but I mean, you may well have some funny moments you'd like to repeat before we sort of do any sort of summing up. But do you have it? Can you think of anything that was particularly funny that you would like to repeat?
Can't think of anything offhand.
It's been a mixed thing, really, hasn't it? I mean, funny is a different thing where you're laughing at something that's happened.
There was one thing at which it wasn't so much funny, but it was very unusual in as much as when the bomb went off, it activated all the alarm systems in the city, and they all went off at the same time, and the racket from that, it was going ram. Yes. It was amazing, the amount of noise from that.
I think Michael means something funny, amusing.
No, that is something, not so much
quirky.
But I can't think, it was most unusual. No, you'd never experience it again. It was most unusual to have all these alarms going off at the same time. Some were hooters, some were bells, some were all it was unbelievable, the noise.
Something that wasn't really funny but it was like, talk about an aftermath. You picked me up at Knott Mill, and we'd been going about 10 minutes, and the exhaust fell off.
We had a bit of an old banger, didn't we?
Oh, yes.
We heard this horrible noise that you get when the exhaust falls off.
And it was rattling on the floor, dragging behind us.
Oh, dear, yeah.
And really, to sum up a little bit, if you were going to give advice to a youngster today, what would that advice be?
I think something that we've really always stood by is respect. You respect people. You don't.
This is something I think
scream and shout and. I always remember my mother saying to me, "When you get in an argument, don't carry it any further." Because the one that shouts, is you bring yourself down to the level of the person that's been shouting and screaming. Just don't do it. So, but respect is something that it's like respecting, and
it covers such a lot. The respect part.
Respect people that you work with. Respect your parents. Respect what space your children need. Respect, it covers such a lot of things, doesn't it? Because there's nothing worse than being spoken to in a way that makes you unhappy or sad or angry or anything. I think possibly that. And opportunities, they will make their own minds up. You can't persuade anybody. We've tried various things, haven't we, in the past, that Vicky's wanted to do, and then it's not worked out.
Well, that respect is a strange thing in a way, because, I mean...
It covers a mill.
Yeah, because there was something happened to me about 2 years ago. I used to always shop at a particular greengrocer's, and on this particular occasion, the way I was spoken to by the person that was serving me meant I'd never go back again. A silly thing like that would lose them customers because they weren't showing respect.
Wasn't anything that you'd done.
No, it's just the way I was spoken to.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you become more sensitive to this when you get older. You're not probably aware of it so much when you're younger, but it's a pity that.
You see it a lot now somehow, and I don't think it's done intentionally. It's very often because it's a kind of a selfishness with perhaps younger people that they don't realise. That it's so nice occasionally if you go as an older person now somewhere and a younger person on the Metrolink gets up and gives you a seat. You're very lucky. Or if somebody asks you something and doesn't tell you something, you know.
But that respect comes in all sorts of forms, because when we were in business, we always made a point of being as nice as we could to customers, and they always came back. And also, if we agreed to a delivery, we were always delivered on time. And it stands you in good stead in life if you do what is expected of you, not what other people might expect.
Yes. I mean, it's about accountability as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
And unlike...
I think everybody would have a different idea about advising, because a lot of people have different experiences, don't they?
Yes.
I mean, if you've had kids to be good and respectful and this, that and the other, you wouldn't have to say that. Some people are not fortunate enough. Other people have bigger problems with... You can't live your life. The one thing that does drive us all potty, and I'm sure it must do with you as well, is there's no socialising amongst themselves. They sit on the tram, they sit on the train, they sit in the airport, and they've all got their heads down.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm going to suggest at that point we finish off, but thank you very much indeed. Very enjoyable listening and talking with you.
Well, I hope we haven't disappointed you.
Not at all. Thank you very much indeed.